And Christina made it just in time. We are good to go. Ray.
Christina's here. Thank you, Dale. I call our September Equity Board meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. All right, I'm going to go through the bullet points that pretty usually goes over. Just some administration for our folks who are joining us online. Be sure to speak clearly and pause frequently. Share your name each time before you speak. And just a reminder to keep your mics on mute when you're not speaking if you're having any technical issues. The best way to resolve that is to log off your device and log back in, but I think everybody else is familiar. So attendance, let's start with that. I'm going to call off names and you just say that you are present. I'll start with myself, Ray Manahan. Shay Fleming.
I am here. Hi, everyone.
Evening. Karthik Kashina.
Everyone, I'm here.
Christina Abotse.
Hi.
Okay. Leslie Millender Irwin.
Hello, everyone. I am present.
Great. Lorna Gilmore.
Here.
Kunal Srivastava.
Here.
Shani Kapoor.
Here.
Kelly Munn.
Here.
Okay. Gail, I think that's it. I don't have to call out the ones we're not.
You do not need to.
Okay.
And Ray, as important to note as we have an absence for every alternate that is here tonight. So all alternates are acting in full capacity this evening.
Thank you. Okay, as we start with every meeting, we want to make sure we give time for public comments. And we have Ted Lucas, member of the Baha'is of Issaquah, who's going to share some updates for us. News.
Sure.
Come on up.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you and some new members and stuff. The old members have seen me before. We've been so happy to collaborate with everybody in the community, very much including the equity board, with hosting about every 3 months a community building social where we have conversation. Everyone in the community who's would like to share thoughts or learn from each other are invited. And the next one will be on September 14th. Dale, I think, has the electronic invite. Some of you have attended several times over in the past. And this time it's going to be in Ray's home at his house up the road. So let's be sure everybody, has enough invitations. You have enough over there. Give you a couple more to pass around. But you have this as well as the electronic, and feel free to bring family members or friends. And the whole idea, just simply sponsored by the Baha'is of Issaquah, is to have conversations about things that build community and make this a welcoming community and a healthy community and so on. And in fact, as Ray's going to be the speaker, he's going to talk about health equity in a very kind of informal, informed kind of conversation where everybody's involved, followed by conversation and dinner, actually. So we start as usual at 5 o'clock, end up anytime you want to end up at 7 or 7:30 or something like that, but food and fellowship included, that kind of a thing. And so that's just a week from Saturday, as you'll see here. And there's Ray's address. He hosted once last year as well. Really wonderful. And heads up for the November Community Building Social. We're excited. I mean, it's interesting. Deputy President of the City Council, Dame Michelle, attended with Kaylee of the Garage. Kaylee was the speaker a couple of times ago. And Barbara came as well. And as a follow-up, she reached back out to the Baha'is and said, she, on behalf of the council, would like 3 members to be the speaker/facilitators at the next one in November. Well, that's pretty interesting and exciting. They want to share what the council is doing and where the council is going, kind of, with community building conversations and support. And she's told us that Victoria Hunt, Tola Martz, and Chris Ray will be at the November one, just spaceholder November 16th, as we do this every 2 or 3 or 4 months. So everybody's excited about the chance to sit down and share with each other and learn. So that's the idea. Thanks very much. I would normally stay, but we have a assembly, the sports fall assembly at the high school. My son's saying, are you gonna be there or not? So we're close. Yeah. All right, thanks very much.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, Ted. Okay, before we get started, we changed things around a couple of meetings ago. We want to start off with our opening question, right? We started that a couple meetings ago. So the one,
Right, we gotta do one thing.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
We'll do approval of the minutes.
Oh,
And then
excuse
do
me.
the question.
Okay, see.
You're good. I got you.
I asked my fellow board members to review the minutes from last month. And I'm seeking for 2 okays.
I'll make a motion that the minutes
Thank you, Kelly.
as is.
Okay, thank you. The meeting's for now.
Right. We gotta invite if there's any discussion or edits. You got this. We got this.
Are there any discussions or edits from the meeting from last month? Notes from the meeting from last month? Okay, we officially call the meetings from last month approved.
You're doing a great job.
Okay, I'm really excited about this question. Our opening question, and we welcome our guests to get in this as well, is what is something you want to make sure you do before the end of summer? Can we believe the end of summer is almost here? And the official last day of summer, if you weren't aware, is September 22nd. So it's just less than 2 weeks away. So I'm just going to go around the room here, starting to my right, and see if anybody would like to share. What is it that you want to make sure that you do before the end of the year? Let's start with Lorna here.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What is one last thing that you would like to get done by the end of summer, which is officially September 22nd?
I have a side of my house that needs to be painted. I have been putting it on my list since May, and not happening, but it will. I hope.
I think that task's got to be done. Kelly?
My son, my husband and I are gonna do one last little backpacking trip on Shishi.
Oh,
It's an easy one, just hike a little bit and then camp out for 2 days.
Where's that? I didn't catch it.
Olympic.
Oh, in Olympic Peninsula. Okay. All right. Shawnee?
Well, surprisingly, that's one thing. I haven't been to that side of Washington at all, but every year I kind of sit down to make plans. If that happens, I'd be really happy.
Okay. Kunal?
Well, for me, it feels like summer's already over
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you just started working next week. But one thing I would like to do before summer ends is probably finish a book series I started at the start of summer. So just finish that.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to get back to the room, but I want to make sure that our board members are online. How about you, Shay?
Oh, Shay, you're muted.
Sorry, I summer's prevented me from figuring out to hit the mute button before I start speaking. So essentially, what I would like to do before the end of the summer is get moved into my new house. So
Thank you.
moving really sucks.
It does.
Christina?
I think if I hear properly, you say about the summer. How was my summer? So I think really good. I enjoyed the family, and as you know, this will be my last meeting. So I am grateful with everything you are teaching me. I'm learning from different places and obviously from you a lot of things. And thank you. Always thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Karthik?
Hi. Yeah, I'd love to go camping either in Rainier or in Mount Baker or the North Cascades National Park.
Stuff. You got to get those done before the end of summer. Leslie?
Yeah, so what would I like to do by the end of summer? Well, my husband told me that the official end was September 1st, so That's not true. So apparently there's still time for end of summer plans. So I've been wanting to go to the what is it? It's the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad. I've been dying to do that, and I'm still new as my family to Washington, so we're still tourists a little bit. So I'm dying to do that. It looks absolutely beautiful, and I can officially say the mountain is out if we're there. I can say that because I know what it means now. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay, I think, I see Andrea on the line. Can I make sure just,
Absolutely.
hi, Andrea.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Welcome.
What I would like to do before the end of the summer is take one last swim in the lake. I did it at the beginning of summer, haven't done it since June, and so one last dip would be really nice before the weather turns. Thanks.
It's supposed to be nice and warm this week and into the weekend.
Mhm.
Good idea. How about Thomas?
Yeah, today is my dog's birthday, so I am very excited to celebrate that with the family, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, what breed, how old?
He's a Australian Shepherd. He is 7 years old. Yeah. He's a very good boy.
Milestone.
Yeah.
And are you Jillian?
Yeah.
Welcome, Jillian. Go ahead, share anything you'd like.
I'm a newbie to Washington, so I just want to go for how you can see a lake and like eat a sandwich up there with my dog. That sounds perfect. In the next like 2 weeks, we're gonna cross the bucket list. So.
Dale?
Yeah, I gotta stick with the outdoor. Technically, the thing I'm most looking forward to is, I'm cheating on Prithi's question. It's right in early fall. I have a permit for the enchantments at the end. Oh my gosh. And I am gonna be grasping on to the last bits of warm weather in late September up in the wilderness.
Oh, wonderful.
Looking forward to that.
Well, just to add, I just got a spot this Saturday for paragliding, so I'm super excited. And
you are brave.
So I was like, it's so busy right now, and but it's going to be tandem, right?
Yeah.
But I'm super enthusiastic about
Still
that.
brave. Amazing.
Okay, mine, I have two very close friends, and one of our routines is every fall we run a marathon. So, and usually, we started this like 15 years ago, so this is total, I think it's gonna be our 22nd or so.
Oh, yeah.
But my long training runs are coming up, so I have to run 18 miles on Saturday, and then my longest run is between 20 to 22 miles a week from Saturday, and the actual marathon is the first Saturday of October in Portland, Maine. We usually choose one on the East Coast because we try to catch a little bit of fall foliage, although it's going to be early. I don't think you're going to really catch it that early. So if you see me running out there, don't run over me because I'm brainless. It's supposed to be nice weather on Saturday, so just got to start early. Oh yeah. Sometimes it's unpredictable. It could start earlier. Sometimes it starts like last 2 years it was late. It didn't come till like early November. We have a great time anyway. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for that. Dale, I'm going to return back. And now is it time for our guests to speak?
The next item is a staff report from me.
Oh, thank you.
And then it will be time. So a very quick update. So as you know, and as I will remind everyone, we added this portion of the meeting in at the beginning of this year as an opportunity to make sure that we're continuing to go back to items from previous months and to better understand the impact that this board has on the work that the city does. And so in July, there were 2 agenda items. One was a presentation around our approach to emergency management and specifically to notification during emergencies from Jared Schneider, our emergency manager. There were no immediate additional actions that the board requested Jared take, except to continue doing the good work that Jared is doing. Given what he shared with us about the current process that he's undergoing and the approach to emergency management through the lens of equity. The second item that we discussed and approved was a letter that was then sent to the mayor and the city council. And we received a response from both the mayor and the city council president. And actually, I would say the most maybe immediate action is that we have a presentation tonight about the equity impact assessment, which was the main ask that was included in that letter. It was an ask to move forward with including that in the upcoming budget. So you'll be hearing tonight and being asked to weigh in a bit more about that next step. And that concludes the brief staff report on updates from July meeting items.
Okay, thank you, Dale. All right, we're going to have our guests come in and talk about their topics. We're going to start with the mobility implementation plan update from Thomas. Am I pronouncing this right? Valdries.
That's correct. Yep.
Thank you, Thomas. Go ahead.
Well, Equity Board, thank you for having me today. My name is Thomas Valdres. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner at Issaquah. I'm hoping to get your feedback on the Mobility Master Plan and have a couple questions for the board. Essentially, do you agree with the proposed changes to the implementation actions, and are there any other changes you'd like to see? So one thing you'll notice is I have changed my slide deck based on what was posted online. I have 30 minutes with you, and I'm really hoping to have a focused conversation as it relates to equity. So I've changed the slides a little bit. Just to provide some background, the transportation element of the comp plan provides the 20-year vision for the transportation network. So there's a vision statement and goals and policies that sort of help make that a reality. The mobility master plan, which we're talking about today, is the functional plan that really provides the actions and strategies to implement the goals and policies of the transportation element. So this is really just based on technical analysis. These are the actions that the city is going to take in the next 20 years to make our vision of transportation a reality. And at a very high level, what we're looking at today in terms of changes, we're hoping to rename the title of the document to Mobility Implementation Plan. And this is really this is based off of some work that the Equity Board has done. There's a DE&I glossary, and it talks about some words that we should avoid. So this is, you can think of this as sort of the first of many implementations of changing up the words that we use. There's also some housekeeping updates and some updates to analysis within the mobility master plan. These are really just because the document has been updated in 4 years, so getting up to speed with those. And what we're talking about today is some goals that relate to equity and transportation. There's also other revisions related to transit, sustainability, and climate resiliency. So those are pretty much the high-level takeaway of the document. This major changes were related to the transit study that I brought to this board over a year ago. But there's a lot of things related to transit and how to get to bus stops and such. So all these sort of actions are fed back into the mobility master plan. Any questions at this point? So just really diving in, and I'll defer to the vice chair on this, but I think my goal was to go slide by slide and then see if there was any feedback, if that works.
Sure.
Okay, great. So again, the first update we're hoping to make is related to the name of the document. We're hoping to change the name to reduce, unintentional harm and just generally just promoting more inclusionary language. Then the next two items are actions within the document. The first one is an annual collision monitoring report. This is really taking inventory on where accidents happen throughout the city. And there's, the contributing factors is what it's called, what led to that accident primarily. So taking inventory in this way can help us understand where accidents are happening and also know how to, intervene in the future. So just being proactive with accidents. The next one related to equity is a review of speed limit setting policies. So the example that I've been giving with this is in a school zone, which is very salient because school's now started. In a school zone, oftentimes the speed limits are reduced when children are present. And that's because of the context, right? There's children there. We want to make sure that people are driving a little bit slower so that there's reaction time and, people can, drive. They can still get through, but we also need to reduce the speed based on the context. So in reviewing speed limit setting policies, this is an action that the city can take. We can make sure that we're still allowing people to get through certain areas while taking into the consideration the context of where speed limits are, and also thinking about how people are getting around, if they're more walkers or cyclists present, or if there's bus present. These are all things that could be thought about as we're considering speed limit setting policies. So I think I'll pause here and see if any questions at this point. Does anything stand out? Do you have any feedback to provide?
Track the demographics of the people who get speeding tickets.
That's a great question. So I don't think so. All this is through like the sheriff's department. So data is pulled through them. That's usually data that the city wouldn't have access to, and I'm not sure that the sheriff's department does.
And what is the policy around people who can't pay?
Yeah, great question. I'm not aware of what the sheriffs do, unfortunately.
So it's all through the sheriff, not the city.
So the police department does. I think they're contracted through the sheriff's department. Yeah, I unfortunately don't know that question yet.
It would be interesting to know what happens if people can't pay and the demographics, and you probably can figure out about that.
Right, yeah. Any other questions?
I think we're good. Just make it great.
The next set, these are also related to equity. So the first one is updating the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan every 5 years. This is something that the city has been doing, and it relates to having a schedule of when we're planning on upgrading infrastructure in order to make sure that things are accessible to folks with disabilities, and just making sure that facilities in general are accessible to everybody. The next one is related to creating performance measures based on all ages and abilities. These performance measures are part of a larger action that we're doing related to making sure that when development comes to the city, upgrades are done to not just roads, but also like sidewalks and like bike lanes and such. So thinking about not just the needs of cars, but also people who walk, people who bike, people who take transit. So this performance measure is related to making sure that upgrades will be done so that it provides for people with other needs other than just driving.
I'm sorry, I can't remember if you mentioned this earlier. This is done annually, is that right?
So this performance measure, this would be a brand new thing.
Okay.
This would be related to a larger effort called transportation concurrency, which we do have this, but this would be like a new way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by performance measure?
Yeah, performance measures. These would be like, well, we haven't defined them yet, but an example could be a sidewalk. If based on the context, a sidewalk is usually like 5 to 6 feet. But if it's near an area where there's a lot of people, typically that could be a bottleneck. Like maybe there isn't enough space for people to walk on a sidewalk. So it could be context specific, where like if it were in a really bustling area of the city, maybe the performance measure would be the sidewalk should be wider because you expect more people will be using it. Otherwise, you might have to walk into the street, which would be like failing, like what you would need. Yeah.
I had a question about the ADA transition
Yeah,
plan.
yeah.
So in the past, how do you, I guess, go about like measuring which areas have like good enough access for those people?
Yeah, well, Dale worked on the ADA transition plan. Do you? wanna answer
Yeah,
that?
so the question is multifaceted and depends on what type of access you're thinking about. So the plan itself looked at, actually, I'm trying to think if the plan came to the equity board, but the plan looked at a number of different dimensions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it looked at the physical infrastructure and the public right of way, so things like crosswalks and curb ramps and the rectangular flashing beacon, rapid rectangular flashing beacon. I learned a lot about transportation lingo when I was working on this. So that's just one aspect. We also looked at the city facilities. So, are the doors wide enough? Are the bathrooms the right shape and size? And are the sort of handles within the bathrooms and are all those things at the right height, or are they in the right place? Are they accessible physically for folks? And then also we looked at our somewhere in between, right? Our parks and open spaces. So our parks and open spaces both have curb ramps and sidewalks, and also packed gravel pathways and things like that. So we actually had a group come and do an assessment of all of that across the entire city to determine where do we have, they kind of looked at it in different dimensions. So they looked at where do we have the things that are the most out of compliance. So where are they the most physically, they provide the greatest number of barriers or the greatest amount of barrier for people. And then we also looked at movement patterns. So where are people most frequently? And so it was determined at sort of a, the word is not nexus, but looking at both those sets of criteria, each work group, so our work group that looks at our parks and open spaces, our work group that thinks about our facilities, and our work group that thinks about our public right of way, has a plan. And this plan says very specifically what they're going to do over the next 7 years, but also outlines what needs to be done in perpetuity to bring those physical parts of the city into compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then there's a whole additional portion, which is around our services, programs, and just the ability for people maybe who maybe don't have physical disabilities in movement, but might struggle with being able to see or hear or engage in different ways. There's a whole section of the plan also around things like that as well. Yeah.
Great. I'll just keep moving on. Okay, so this next one is related to equity evaluations in infrastructure planning. So this is related to how the city plans for large purchases related to capital improvements, building new roadway segments, construction, that sort of things. So this action would be ensuring that equity is sort of built into that process, into the capital improvement and transportation improvement process. The next two are related to bike and scooter share program or an e-bike library program. So these are two separate ideas, but some of you may recall at one point, I think it was a year and a half ago or so, there was talks about potentially a bike or scooter share program coming to the city. It ended up being just like a program that really wasn't a great fit for the community, but there is still some appetite to consider another opportunity if there was a program that really was tailored to the community. Another related idea is the idea of having an e-bike library program. So as we all know, like Issaquah has lots of hills, and having an e-bike could help you get up that hill. And a library program would be a way, depending on how it's structured, it could be a way where bikes live somewhere, either owned by the city or another organization, and they're lent out so that people can try it out before they commit to getting an e-bike, or it could be renting it just for some time period for use. So these are just ways to enhance mobility options. For some folks that don't have access to an e-bike, this could be a great way to get around on a temporary basis, just sort of like in a rental, just like a scooter share program where you're sort of sharing resources. So these are just ways to make sure that access is more affordable and sustainable.
The bottom two are very clear to me.
Yeah.
But the first one is really vague, and just in reading it, it seems that's fraught with the most possible inequities because of how it's done. So can you speak more to the 332?
Sure. Yeah. So equity evaluations in infrastructure planning, this would be, considering the context of where a road is, for example. It could be related to demographics, like who might be benefited from a new trail facility, for example. So you would, you'd look at demographic information, you'd look at sort of like how people are getting around. So you can sort of assume based on like how people travel, we have data on that. You can make assumptions of like who might benefit from like a new sidewalk or a new bike lane. And these sort of benefits would then be sort of built into project evaluation criteria. So
Let's basically just keep track and collect data on and ensuring that certain groups and certain communities are getting access.
Right. So it's data driven. It's also, we receive feedback in meetings. So we're taking all this into consideration, but it is sort of built into how we like at a numerical level are like scoring projects. Does that sort of make sense?
How in your mind does equity go into that mapping?
Yeah, so I would say that equity, often when we're looking at the capital improvement side, we're looking at demographic data. I think that's answering what your question is, right?
Completely.
Okay.
So similar to what Kelly asked, a lot of it is data driven. So how are we collecting that data, number one? And number two, that data which is being collected, how do we know that we have all the variables within it that lead to the lens of equity,
Yeah, we do have limited data sources available, but primarily we're relying on like the census data, which does have some margin of error. And I don't know if there's other ways that we sort of try to use other benchmark data for that, but I think census data is primarily the data source that we would use.
I think I'm really struggling with that one because it's so broad and underserved, like promoting fair access to transportation. A lot of different people and whose voices at the table and how you collecting it and what is your measure. I love the bottom two. I maybe it's just in the wrong section. It should be on its own because it's throwing me off because it feels like it's an entire project on its own. So that it encompasses all of these different programs, I guess is my worry and wonder.
Okay. One thing that came up is, are you all on the listserv where you get updates from transportation updates from the city, et cetera, et cetera? There was one that came up last week and it was talking about putting another throughfare, a bridge over I-90. So I was curious, and I was going to probably attend one of those meetings, but before they decide on where to put this, I would assume those city planners have some inkling in their heads that they feel one part of the city is not being served by the current infrastructure. Does that make sense so far? So if they're going to put a bridge over I-90, my question back to that group is, was there, again, data that led you to believe that one area of the city is being underserved, that we felt a need to create a new overpass over I-90? What prompted this? I think when I think about it, it's that backup on 900 that's causing this, and we did another route to get that through. But as far as what kind of equity lens they put into that discussion or that planning, maybe that would be a good example for us to follow.
I can actually,
Oh, wonderful.
yeah, I can
Yeah, yeah.
You have
can
the
answer that
answer at the
question.
table.
Yeah,
Great.
that is not my project, but I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So the central Issaquah neighborhood, which is generally like bound by the state park and to the north and Newport to the south, and then just west of SR 900, and then sort of
Yes.
backing up to Old Town over here.
Yep.
We're expecting like 2/3 of all jobs and housing over the next 20 years to be in that area. So really funneled growth, which is why we're expecting light rail also in that neighborhood. But like you said, that neighborhood is bisected by the freeway.
Yeah.
So in order to make sure that the growth that we're envisioning happens in that area, we need to connect both north and south of the neighborhood. Yeah, so the overcrossing, the undercrossing, whatever it is, that will basically connect the largest growth that we'll expect in 20 years. That's, yeah, does that make sense?
So
and then, yeah, from the equity standpoint, I think that was the next.
Exactly.
Yeah.
From an equity standpoint, was there something that is either, if it wasn't part of the conversation, what are you looking to the equity board to bring to the table to say, and I think a lot of that is data driven. Was there some sort of data that led us to believe that, oh, one part of Issaquah is underserved based on income, based on whatever,
right,
that was incorporated into the planning?
Right. I think to answer that, I would say that in the future, we are expecting that neighborhood to be the most diverse neighborhood in the city.
Okay.
So by connecting it, that becomes a reality. And we're going to have like way more housing diversity there. We're going to have lots of different job types for all income levels. That's like sort of helping that just become a reality.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but the complexities around that are huge.
Sure.
So look at Rainier Valley, right? The idea was to bring transportation in for the community, but the community was pushed out in order for that to occur. That would be, right? So that's why I think there's so much like feeling about that statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
Right.
it doesn't feel like equity was backward planning, because you didn't feel, at least that was
Yeah.
it feels like you'll plan something and thinking that it's going to, and I'm not saying it's wrong,
Right.
but I'm just confused because it doesn't feel like it matches that statement that it's with equity in mind. It's for growth in mind that may have equity, but we can't project where the low income house. I mean, that seems scary that you're projecting where the underserved communities, because my wonder and my hope is we make sure that we don't have any underserved communities in the future. So we can plan for these underserved communities for the future, because we're going to make sure we don't have them.
Yeah.
So I think for right now, and I think part of my concern is I feel like that statement is for all of your things. At least that's what I'm seeing. I guess I'm just confused why it's called out separately, and maybe that section is different in general. I'm not sure.
So two things, because I need to get us moving along. For the folks on the line, I just want to be respectful. Does anybody have a question? I don't see any hands raised for Thomas, the rest of us. Okay, so what you're getting from us is the first one is a little foggy for us.
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
On it. And if it's an upcoming meeting where there's data or whatever progress is going on with that as it relates specifically to that first line, with underserved communities, that's what sticks out of my head. I don't even know who the underserved communities are in Issaquah. It sounds like there's some thought given around that. That would be interesting data for us.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, keep moving on. So this next one is related to access improvements. So essentially making sure that getting to a bus stop or a bus station, there is a way to get there. That there's a sidewalk that connects you. There's a bike lane that will take you to the transit center or the bus stop, making sure that there's curb ramps. There could be a great option to ride transit, but if you physically cannot get there, it's not great. So making sure that that's sort of built into the actions. Next one is related to microtransit. So we currently have Metroflex, which is this great program in the city. I think maybe some of you have ridden it, but it's a van system that takes you through Sammamish and Issaquah. It provides a really affordable way to get around, and it takes you to some great spots. It also currently takes you to the hospital. So I know that some folks use that to reach their medical appointments. So just another great option. This action is related to sustaining that. Metroflex is currently a pilot to be discontinued or extended in December of 25. So this is an action that says we should consider sustaining it beyond that. And then we're just calling it microtransit in case King County Metro changes the name on us or something.
Just out of curiosity on Metroflex, because it's a pilot,
Yeah.
Are we again looking at like a data on who all are using it and how frequently or?
Yeah, we do have that data. I'm not the program manager for that. I do know that I think the only like sort of demographic data that would distinguish one person or another for the purposes of this discussion, there's a way to it's app based, so you can toggle if you have mobility or like any sort of disabilities. There's like a mobility or like hearing. So there's ways to sort of indicate if you are impaired in some way. It'll pick you up like literally where you're at. Otherwise, you might have to walk a couple blocks to reach it. So yeah, we do have a pretty good ridership, and it's growing every month, I'm told. So yeah. Next is related to bus stop locations and bus amenities. So these are really sort of working with King County Metro or Sound Transit, who provides our buses, making sure that the locations are strategically located near where people actually are or like need to get to. So we often will work, every like sort of season with Sound Transit to make sure that our bus stops are located in good spots. The other thing that related to that is the amenities that are actually like provided at the bus stop. So you could have a great bus stop, but if it feels like it's uncomfortable or unsafe to be at that bus stop, we need to do something about that. So advocating for bus stop amenities with Sound Transit or King County Metro. One example of this is there's a bus stop over here that does not have a shelter. We're currently working with King County Metro to get a cover over it. Yeah, so this is already in the works, but again, it's just sort of formalizing this action so that we keep on it.
I just had a quick question about this. So over the summer, I went to Victoria in Canada, and all we did to go around is go on public transportation. It was really connected and anywhere you wanted to go. Buses were everywhere. And they also collected a lot of data. I feel that King County and Issaquah, the buses don't necessarily collect. So on the Metro app, there were survey questions about how do you feel about the quality of the bus stop? Was it comfortable? How clean was it? Vandalism. And then I feel like there's also some fun to it. You could like put emojis for how you felt for each bus stop. So I think that could be a good way to.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know that Metro is constantly doing surveys. Sometimes they do onboard surveys where they walk. I feel like most people probably wouldn't want to talk to somebody if they're, waiting for the bus. But yeah, these are all great options, and maybe like the phone-based or said it was phone-based?
Yeah, on the app.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay. Or that's a great comment. Like if you're standing at the bus stop, just having a QR code to have a comment.
Yeah.
So it might not be on the app. I'm very familiar with that app because I take 554 to Seattle like every other day. So if you have something that came up for you personally that you can even do anonymously, right? You don't have to, just so they can have some opportunities for feedback would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is the last action for our discussion, and this is sort of loosely related to transportation. It's more about parking though. So this action came about. There was an existing policy that talked about the need to ensure that parking is addressed in the Old Town area. So this is a adjustment to that parking action. So the city is planning on doing a parking study, and the intent of this study is to right size the parking that we require as a condition of building, like housing or like new sort of commercial areas, and really like making sure that the context is sort of taken into consideration. Parking is a big area to build, and it costs money, and that money is passed on to the purchaser or the renter. So if we can reduce parking requirements, or if we can make sure that parking is just fitting the needs of like now and then like into the future when we need it, we can make sure that the cost of building things is lower. We can make sure that housing is more affordable. We can make sure that parking doesn't become the issue for the reason why we don't get things that we would like in this community. So this parking study, which we're going to kick off, and it's going to take about a year to do it. This is addressing that and making sure that it's right sized to the community that we have today, and also like where we're trying to go in the future.
That'd be fascinating, considering what's going on all around us, right? With Linwood and the communities that are popping up there. I assume that's going to probably be paid for parking if you're a commuter to catch that bus. And we're lucky it's not happened to us yet here, but might be down the road. Thank you.
All right, well, that's most of what I got. I just wanted to maybe give an opportunity, I guess. Were there any other comments for the mobility master plan that I could get from this board? Any other things that stuck out to you all?
For me personally, it was just that one that we called out. I
Yeah.
think we probably just need to elaborate on that more.
Sure.
What would help us with that narrative is some numbers, right? Some data.
Yeah.
What we shared with you, that'd be really helpful.
Okay.
I think besides the underserved community, I think I was stuck on the action of equity evaluation and infrastructure planning, because to me, that could be something we do in all of this, like in parking location. So I think I'm stuck on why is that called out separately rather than embedded in every single one of the actions as part of the SMART goals or whatever you're calling it. Like as you're doing each one of these actions, why isn't that thing evaluation embedded in each, like the bus stop locations? That's infrastructure planning. So why is this as one infrastructure planning and the other one separate, and how do they come together? So why can we, is it possible to just make sure that that sentence, that phase, that action is being done in every single thing, like it's an overarching message?
It's a part of the process.
Yeah.
It's a process action, it's a how, not a what.
Exactly, because everything else is very concrete except for that one, where it's an evaluation process you're going through to do this action, and it's a lens. Because I think our group is to help the city look at the lens and are you taking all the steps as you're doing these actions? So I think that action needs to be embedded, but I think it's been separated somehow.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe that comes back at some point.
Sure. Yeah.
We get a better idea in probably early in 2025, because we've got a lot. We are full for the end of this year, y'all.
Yeah.
It was hard getting these two in tonight.
I appreciate your
I had to
time.
push things, but I think
Yeah.
seeing like what is that process? What does an equity evaluation?
And I see the equity built in the actions on the how very often. So I was really happy with all of that. So I was really confused that you pulled it out over here, and I'm like, and now I'm wondering if like you're saying you're going to do it with equity. So that should include all of that. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
but the other ones look great.
Okay, great.
Anybody on the line? Questions? Karthik, Christina, Shay, Leslie? I think we're
No
good.
question.
Right. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to continue down our agenda, and our next speaker is Jillian Straub, who's going to share an update on our equity impact assessment. Jennifer, good?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take Thomas's spot. But
Yeah, sounds great.
Bye, Thomas.
Bye, thanks.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
All right, let me get set up to share here.
And while Jillian is doing this, hi, Andrea, Deputy City Administrator here. And while she's setting us up and Jillian's going to be taking on most of the presentation today, I just wanted to cue us up and kind of remind us where we left off last time. I came before the board a few months ago. I want to say it was all the way back in April to talk about how we're embedding equity into the budget process this year. And one of those items that you might recall is this equity assessment that we will be asking council to provide some funding for. And so we wanted, I think at that April meeting, I said, we're going to come back to you in the fall and have another conversation about what could this equity assessment look like and what some of our ideas are. And so that is the purpose of this meeting. So here we are back and wanting to talk with you a little bit more in depth about the equity assessment. And Jillian has done some great work in terms of doing some research about what other jurisdictions have done and has really helped us get a little more organized around this idea of an assessment. So with that, I'd like to thank Jillian for her work so far and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Andrea. Like Andrea mentioned, I'm a management analyst with the city. I started in May, so I'm relatively new. But I come to this work with some other local government experience in the Midwest, where I was also part of equity teams, like the internal staff teams. This has been an important part of my professional career and a big part of why I'm in government. So I'm excited to present to you today on the equity impact assessment. So the purpose of today's presentation is for me to introduce a little bit more of what we're thinking, give you an update from that April meeting, answer your questions about the assessment, and then we'll spend the bulk of the time identifying those goals, the scope, and your role in shepherding the assessment and owning the results. So to that end, we'll first preview the discussion items. You all can kind of think about those as we talk through some of the other information. We'll review past actions that the city, the board, and the administration have taken and why we need an equity assessment. We'll talk through 4 different equity assessment examples because that can look pretty different from community to community and to kind of ground us in kind of what's possible for an assessment like this. We'll talk through what administration identifies as its goals for an equity assessment. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about the roles of the administration, this board, and city council in the equity assessment. But we're going to crunch all of that into hopefully less than half the time we have allotted, because I want to spend most of the time turning it over to all of you to talk about what you envision your role being, what your most important goals are, and those things. So I'm saying it so you all can also keep me accountable. But so as we talk through some of the information I just mentioned, I want you all to be considering what are your top goals for the assessment, knowing that we can't do everything. What are the most important things for an assessment to do? What scope is appropriate? As we talk through some of the examples, you'll see that some cities measure and assess things that are not directly under city control or influence. What feels right for Issaquah from your perspective? And then finally, what's the board's role in the assessment? So with all of that, I took a little snapshot of some of the past actions that City Council and the Equity Board has taken in 2020 with adopting the Police Accountability, Equity, and Human Services Action Plan, which was then the impetus for the creation of this board. In the subsequent year, the work that you all did, or this board did, along with the administration to develop the equity framework.
and then spending last year and this year assessing and applying the equity framework. As an outsider, when I see these actions, I can see clear community drive to pursue equity in a lot of our work, and I think we heard that today from Thomas as well. But I don't exactly know what the vision is. I don't know like where we're going necessarily, and that's a little bit of what I think we hope the equity assessment can bring to us. So when we talk about an equity assessment, we hope that it's going to first give some of that strategic direction, or I guess not first, but give some of that strategic direction, and create space to create that community vision of equity in Issaquah, taking into account voices like our elected leaders, community members like all of you, the rest of the community, the administration, creating a centralized kind of communally driven vision of equity. Then assessing where our current policies and practices are or aren't aiding us in reaching that vision, that assessment portion, and then creating a plan to kind of go from there, making sure that we match our actions with our vision. This is also called out, as you all well know, in the strategic plan update task force, as equity is the only value that the city has adopted that doesn't have a functional plan to go along with it. So there's clear community drive for the equity assessment. And we think it can really help kind of strategically align a lot of our efforts that we're undertaking. So an equity assessment can mean different things to different people and different things to different communities. So I took a look at 4 different communities that have done an equity assessment relatively recently. These were provided in your packet if you want to do a deeper dive. But I'll just run through them briefly now, so that we're all on the same page. So Hopkins, Minnesota is a small suburban community in the Twin Cities. They conducted a survey which included community members as well as elected officials and staff, assessing essentially how the organization is doing related to equity, and how it's perceived. So an example question that was part of that survey was, rate your agreement with this organization has an annual budget for DEI that allows it to meet its goals. There are a lot of different ways to answer that question, and there are a lot of different approaches to that question depending on where you sit as a community member versus a staff member versus an elected leader. So just kind of gives you an example of the scope of that assessment. And they don't necessarily do action plans in the same way that Issaquah has done them. They take kind of 1-year bites at particular gaps noted in their assessment, create an action plan for that year for 1 to 2 topic areas, including measurement and things like that, but they're definitely shorter term plans than some of the plans that Issaquah has. The next city we looked at was Oakland, California, quite a bit different, a large metropolitan area, obviously, and they're really focused on measurement. So they took a literature review of some of the indicators that are important given Oakland's history and context, and then measured present day. How are we doing on those things? That included things like the life expectancy of different demographic groups. I think we all realize that city services definitely have an impact on life expectancy, but it is by no means the only lever. So this is a really good example of a really broad scope in an assessment. It might be difficult to measure how city efforts are moving the needle on something like that when there are so many other inputs when we were looking at that. So that's Oakland's. The next is Edina, Minnesota. It's a suburban community, a little bit larger, affluent, and wider than Hopkins, Minnesota, that we just talked about. So they did an assessment with a third party that conducted an assessment of several different cities and counties in the area. So they were part of a peer cohort who went through this assessment together. One survey was distributed to staff who then assessed whether or not the city had implemented best practices for advancing racial equity. So these are tightly controlled by what the city can and cannot do, so quite a bit different than Oakland. It was highly comparable to other cities, but there was no action plan, and it was focused on racial equity. So that's a little bit about Edina's. And then finally, Westland, Oregon. This is a suburb of Portland. They used a variety of methods, probably the most of any of the ones that I had looked at. They surveyed staff, community leaders. They also dropped in on meetings. They interviewed neighborhood association, conducted focus groups, reviewed policies and procedures. So it was a really comprehensive assessment. And then the consultant kind of mapped them on an external proprietary DEI index. So it does lose a little bit in terms of being able to replicate that or directly compare maybe to other peer organizations. And there was no action plan included in that kind of an assessment. So now that we've run through those four and you kind of have a sense of the scope of what's possible with an equity assessment, we presented all of this to the equity team, I believe earlier in the summer, but I don't remember what month. We talked through all the examples and then we had a discussion about what was most important to them. And these were the top priorities. So that first one,
This is from the internal equity team.
yes. Yes. So that vision of equity in Issaquah, that sense of where we're going, what's our North Star, that was of primary importance. Sequentially there, then the gaps and needs analysis, evaluating how we're doing compared to what we've stated our goal is. They also thought that one of the strengths of several of the examples was engaging the community, right? Calling people into this conversation. So a community engagement plan that'd be provided by a consultant was important to staff or to the administration. That action and implementation plan also called out by the strategic plan update task force and a way to measure our performance. Those two go hand in hand. And then staff also called out a need to review and recommend on staff training. This is a good example of staff knows where some of the gaps are, right? They want to be able to engage in best practices there, but we really need that gaps and needs analysis because we don't know what our blind spots are. So I just included that there as an example. So these are the items that were the administration's goals. And then this, I believe, is our last slide before we move into discussion. So when considering what this assessment could look like with the three groups who would be primarily involved, the administration, the equity board, and the city council, in conducting the assessment and owning the results, this is kind of what we had envisioned. We thought that both the administration and the equity board would have a role in informing that scope of work. How broad do we take it? Do we take it to an Oakland life expectancy level, or is there a scope of work that's more appropriate? And I can share what administration thought of that as well. Administration would draft and propose that scope of work, but we might see the equity board reviewing that. And then we'd obviously manage the consultant team and set priorities once there is a consultant on board. And we see the equity board as also setting some of those priorities for the consultant. City council in conducting the assessment, it intersects with their budget process. So they're currently considering, or they will consider in September and October, the 25-26 biennial budget. This is a budget cut year for the city of Issaquah. So every department is considering reductions. So any new items, even one-time items like an equity assessment, are subject to a high level of scrutiny, knowing what it kind of costs to be able to do something like that. We think this work is important and we need to move forward with it. So even if we don't get that whole package from vision to action plan funded by the city council, we still will be able to make progress on this and not wait till the next biennium. So that's why we're bringing it to you today before we know whether we have funding for this or not. So I just wanted to kind of underscore why this is in front of you and that ultimate kind of decision power lies with city council. They may be involved in improving the scope for consultants and also setting priorities. Then once we were to have an assessment, we see administration as being responsible for making progress on a lot of the priority initiatives, measuring that progress. We think that the equity board may have room to base a portion of your work plan on assessment results and hold administration accountable, which we'd also see city council as doing. This is what we've proposed. This is one of our discussion questions for all of you, so I'll be curious to hear your reactions to this. And with that, before we move into discussion, I just want to make sure, first with the folks online, if there are any kind of clarifying questions I can answer before I move into like the discussion questions. All right, anyone in the room have like a clarifying question? All good? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
So, we keep talking about the vision. Where is the vision coming from? Who's working on the vision?
We think that would be part of the consultants. Yeah, that would be part of their job to kind of develop, to kind of put together a plan to get that vision, if that makes sense. So put together a plan to engage with the kind of partners, right? Our elected leaders, all of you community members, staff, and kind of guide and shepherd that process.
So it's all of that's going to be outsourced basically, and then somebody is going to work on getting that by involving the communities and however it is decided.
Yes.
Shay, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand raised. Yeah. Oh, thumbs up. Okay, thank you. I have a
So
question.
just saying that I don't have a question.
Okay, thank you. If you guys recall, there was a consultant that was here a couple years ago. So I'm not sure what happened to that, but some of us took some considerable amount of time attending a training session. This is around DEI. So can you connect some of that past work with that consultant to get passed on, or do we have to start anew again from this new consultant that's coming in?
I see that Andrea's kind of come off mute there, so I'm going to pass it to her.
Yes, I think you're talking about Shannon, who
Yes.
did great. Yeah, Shannon, she was hired to do lots of trainings with city staff as well as our city council and all of our boards. So her primary role was really to do a training and start having discussions about it within the city organization. You know, what we took out of that was, I think, after that training is really when the framework was finished in development and adoption. So what we're talking about is really what the next step is. And I think we have talked a lot about equity, but I don't know that we have really defined it well for the city of Issaquah, what it really means, gotten community buy-in for that in terms of what does it mean for the city of Issaquah. I know we kind of stumbled upon that even in our April discussion of how we wanted equity to be included in our budget. And so one of those things that we would want to do is taking from those trainings that we've started several years ago, and we've certainly done additional training since then. I think more trainings are planned for next year for boards. Going into an assessment of how are we doing? Let's all get on the same page about what that definition of equity, what does it mean to us? How do we want to define it in the city? Have a community engagement process around that, and kind of build off of some of the trainings that were done. So she didn't really do an assessment, she more did trainings, but we want to build off of that and really take a hard look at how we're delivering programs and services.
Thank you. That's helpful. Follow-up question for those, because we have new board members who weren't here present at that first session. Are they going to be at a disadvantage because they didn't go through the same training that we did? No. Okay.
No, I think we recognize that this is something we need to continually work on. We need to have continuous trainings on this as we all deepen our skill sets and understanding of what equity, inclusion, belonging, et cetera, really means to us and how we can implement on those values. So we're gonna format it so that people can enter the conversation from whatever starting point they're at, knowing that that's true in the general community as well as on our boards, right? Everybody's kind of part of this conversation coming from a different perspective, coming from a different place. And so that's going to be a key point of our participation plan, is to make sure that everybody can weigh in.
Thank you.
And with that, we can turn to our discussion items for tonight. So we'll go in order here, but I'll just read them briefly for those online. We're first going to talk about what are the top goals of this group for the assessment, what scope is appropriate, and sorry, I was reading the chat. What scope is appropriate? Should an assessment include items that the city does not directly influence? And what is the board's role? I see that there is a message that what parallels were seen between the 4 cities that we reviewed in Issaquah. Is there one or more that would make sense for Issaquah to emulate? Yeah, so I'll address that briefly before we move into the discussion. These cities are pretty different from Issaquah, both because of their geographic location and the context in which they were formed. I'd say demographically, Hopkins might be the most similar, but again, it is smaller. It's 18,000 people. Westland, Oregon has the advantage of being on the West Coast and in a suburban setting as well, but their diversity stats are quite a bit different. They are, again, a smaller city. And they all engaged in pretty different kinds of assessment. So I don't think there is necessarily one that we thought, that's it, let's replicate that for Issaquah. We thought, oh, I really like that, or I really like that component of it, but I could take or leave some of the others. So that's what we kind of saw in our evaluation of it. Okay, but with that, I'd like to return to what are the top goals for the assessment? And I'll actually put the administration's top goals back up there so we can kind of react to those. Did anything surprise you on this list?
Well, this is me personally, because this group knows this same question I ask over and over again. And I'd like you guys to chime in. Defining equity within this room cannot be done. We need to be able to hear the voices of our community. That's why the third bullet is particularly important to me. Like, are we going out there? And what can the board do in regards to that third bullet? Are you looking to us to be the ones driving those discussions within the community, asking them, do you feel inequity anywhere around here that we need to bring together and discuss as a board so we can craft it, maybe share with our leadership? I don't know what that is. So I was at one point willing to walk down Front Street and ask business owners saying, do you feel there's inequity in the city? And can I just understand a little bit more about that? So if something that probably with these bullets, with these administrative goals, can we be specific on what is it that the plan is asking of the members of the board here, specific tasks?
Yeah, I think that we haven't defined that yet. That's a little bit of what we want to hear from you. It sounds like involvement in crafting the community engagement plan. And I think I've seen community engagement plans be successful when you all promote and encourage people to join discussions about this kind of thing. But without, a lot of these tasks are ones that would be undertaken by the consultant in partnership, right, with the administration, with city council, with the community, with all of you. So we don't have clear answers on that yet. But it sounds like bullet 3 is a clear priority.
For me.
Yeah, okay.
And I'd love to hear my fellow board members' thoughts around this.
I'd love to add to Jillian's answer real quick. In that the second question, if you recall, is what is the equity board's role in all of this? And so I think what typically happens with functional plans, as we look at other plans the city has that are shepherded by other boards the city has, typically a consultant would perform a lot of the work, and the board would provide kind of high-level guidance in terms of scope, in terms of what kind of deliverables we'd like to see, what are the overall goals for the work to be done. So that's most typical for our boards. But the second question really is, how involved does the board want to be and put effort towards this? I think we really respect our boards. We want advice from you on policy level decisions. We want you to be engaged. And we also know that this isn't your full-time job. You have other work, you have families. This is volunteer work. And so we want to be really respectful of you and the time that you choose to give and donate to the city as well and the community. So, we can have more of a discussion on what the board wants their role to be. But certainly we haven't had many boards that have been able to volunteer more of their time to be so heavily involved in such outreach.
Just want to know, you've got a question in the chat from Shay, and then Shay, I think I saw you raise your hand briefly as well, so feel free to take yourself off of mute.
Yes, because when you asked what I found surprising to be on this list, the vision of equity in Issaquah seems really surprising to me, because I've always thought that it was quite clear that our goal is to ensure that not only is there racial diversity, but there's cognitive diversity, there's functional diversity, and that we are utilizing that knowledge to give everyone the opportunity to enjoy our city. So I had to ask whether or not we took the time to look at the dimensions of equity and DEIB in those respects so that we can better define those dimensions for the community.
Yeah, so I think we definitely talked about, in response to the first part, about whether or not we need to define what equity means in Issaquah and define a vision around it. It sounds like this kind of feedback is exactly the kind of thing we'd be looking for, right? If this is a strongly held community belief that's prevalent and already well-defined, it might just be a matter of in some way codifying that. If that's not the case, and if we need to hear from other folks or need to call other people into the conversation, then that's a little bit of what that is. It's ensuring that we're all on the same page about what it means to provide equitable service and have equitable outcomes in Issaquah. So that's like a conversation to be had sort of goal as a part of this. And then have we looked at the equities the dimensions of equity? Yes, we did a little bit. It stuck out to the administration and to staff that looking at just racial equity like Edina did wouldn't be a good fit and wouldn't be what we wanted to do for Issaquah. Like there was a broader approach that was needed. So we definitely talked about that in that sense, wanting to acknowledge the intersectional nature of a lot of this and fit our community a little bit better. Does that answer your question?
That does, because I think that's a big part in helping us answer these questions for you, or at least address them in a way that's productive.
Okay.
I was very happy to see vision of equity in Issaquah because I would agree that I think we had an instance last year where we had a meeting and equity needed to be defined. And it was surprising to me because I didn't understand how it wasn't clear. So I love to see that as number one, and I love to see a sixth goal saying review the recommendation because it's a recognition of the staff in, hey, we recognize that our staff, our board, our community doesn't know. So I think it's recognition and humility all in one. And I really appreciating seeing these goals here. And the community engagement plan, I think as with Ray, I struggle with that sometimes because how do we do that? Because then in your next slide, you talk about do we make it like more, I'm a very concrete sequential person, like measurement, this and that. And how do we measure community engagement? Because I think our community sometimes is very torn apart and has been for a while. And how do we measure the work from the city and individuals? Even though we're trying to do it, it's not happening, but not because of the work that is being done. And so to me, I think my main one, I love the first and last one, just sandwiching it. And I also really appreciate the gap analysis, action and performance, because I see all the different departments coming to us for us to help identify any gaps that they might be having, because what we did a lot in our training was to say that we as a board would help them be a sounding board to ensure that equity was in their practices in the different departments. And I see that concrete plan in all the departments in coming to us as a sounding board, taking a response, and then I'm looking forward to see performance measurement over time. And so that to me is more concrete. So the community engagement plan is the one that I'm struggling the most.
Yeah, and I think every community engagement manager in every city in the country would agree. It's always hard to know if we're reaching everyone we needed to reach, right? That is kind of an enduring part of that work. And I think what we hope for there is to really specifically kind of lay out who exactly we want to hear from in this, how we plan to engage them, and if we aren't successful, what's plan B? What's the next option, right? Where do we need community input? Like, where's the right place to kind of stagger that in an assessment of this nature? So it does remain a little bit undefined.
Is there a timeline that we're looking at for this?
Yeah, I think, and Andrea might be able to speak a little bit more to this, but we think that the assessment portion could take 6 months, but not more than a year. It'll take a little bit of time to get a consultant on board. But we'd hope to have some preliminary recommendations if this moves forward at the beginning of 2025 with the funding that we would ask for in the recommended budget, to have some preliminary recommendations by the end of 2025. And a full completed plan in 2026.
And you mentioned two important things here. One is the consultant, which seems to be who would be doing the bulk of the work.
Yes.
And defining the variables and everything else. So that's very key to understand how we go about finding that consultant. Number two, as you mentioned about budget cuts that the city is doing. So with keeping that in mind, what's like our plan B on that?
Yeah, totally. Okay. So if this is funded at the level that we would ask of city council, then this would likely be a competitive bid kind of situation we'd put out, I believe. I'm not totally up to date on Washington state law around a lot of this, but we would do a competitive process. We would put out an RFP. That's something that we would maybe want this board's feedback on to kind of make sure we included all the elements, those deliverables that are important. It would also go through kind of like the internal staff kind of approval process. And then we would review all of the proposals and make a selection from there. We don't have like beyond that, I don't have a concrete answer on it. But that's kind of the process we would follow. And we'd hope to kick that off in January. So doing a lot of prep work this year. And then I see Andrea raised her hand, so I'll let her chime in.
And because this question relates to timing and budget as well. So Jillian's absolutely correct. We'd go through a competitive bidding process. We'd look for consultants that have experience in working with communities to do this work. And then we would have a panel pulled together that would include staff and equity board members, if you should so choose. We need to have that role conversation to select the successful consultant and then begin that contracting process with them. But it is really dependent on the budget process. So Jillian talked a little bit earlier in the presentation about our budget cuts that we have to do for 25 and 26. Jillian also talked about what the council's role is in all of this. So part of the mayor's proposed budget will include an equity assessment. I don't know how much money it will include at this point because we're still trying to balance the budget, look at all the other asks that we have for 25 and 26 associated in the budget. So it could be that as we look at all of these goals on the screen, that maybe we need to phase the assessment. And maybe in 25, we need to look at the community engagement plan and starting those vision conversations about equity. Maybe that's all we can do in 25. Kind of depends on how much money we have for this work. And then we might need to take these things by phases and kind of, sections of work before we can really complete and fulfill on all these goals listed here. So we can start the work in 25, as Jillian said. We're hopeful that council will approve some amount of budget to do that. We have different options for, scaling this work as well and making it as big or as phased as we can afford, with the idea that we still want to move forward. Even though we're having budget concerns and all these other things, this remains a priority and we want to advance this work.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to hear that, it's the word priority is really nice, that the city is giving it so much importance. Thank you.
Christina, I just want to note that I have down your comment that we need to take some time and consider who's being included and how the equity board is being included. And then I want to leave time for the next two questions. So if that's all right, we can move on to what scope is appropriate. When you heard about Oakland measuring life expectancy and Edina measuring really specific kind of narrow questions, what stood out to you, and what do you all think would be appropriate for Issaquah? Shay, I see your question. Do we know if metrics are budget influential? Can I get a little bit more detail there?
Yes. So, for example, with my company, essentially how much money we allocate to DEIB is dependent on what metrics we define and what metrics we actually are able to measure, which tends to be really hard when it comes to equity, just because it's, what goals we need to meet. Are we even meeting the right goals? So, to some respect, I'm kind of curious as to whether or not we need to start with what goals we need to reach and what metrics we need to be able to measure in order to help the city determine what our budget can be or should be.
I think, Andrea, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, great question. The city of Issaquah doesn't do performance-based budgeting. So we don't have budget initiatives that are tied to performance on a certain measurement. We instead use more of a strategic planning basis. So we look at what are the priorities established in our strategic plan and we attempt to fund those first. We haven't quite tied our metrics. We have plenty of performance metrics that we use. We haven't quite tied them to the budget. And it's difficult to do just for the reasons that you cited, right? Is sometimes if something is performing, it means you need to invest more in that thing. So we haven't quite tied that because I think it's difficult to do, especially for the vast purposes of general city government. And how to compare against those priorities based on performance, it's very difficult to do. So instead, we use the strategic plan as our guide for telling us what our priorities are when we are funding different initiatives.
Thank you.
Just a quick time check. We have technically have 4 more minutes for this. So 4 to 9 more minutes.
My vote for number 2 would be yes, just because I'm ultimately all about community. And so I'd want to know and feel the heart of the community, because sometimes you might not get it in measures of certain ways, but an assessment that might not be directly something that the city directly influences. If the city finds out something and looking more deeply into it, they can see how they can influence and impact sideways, right? Maybe it is some kind of art initiative or something that human resources does, or what can we do? Because ultimately, as a city, we want our community to grow, to be happy. I just want a community to be like Issaquah, to be this great, positive, happy community, which is not always possible. But I would want to know what's not working, even if the city is not the one who's doing it, so that the city can have that in mind as they're looking at other factors. So it's nice to know, even if you can't influence it.
Okay, that's helpful. Anyone else have strong thoughts and opinions on this? I can share that from the conversations with the equity team, most people felt like we should be measuring the outcomes of our programs, right? Like not like inputs, like how much do we spend on X, but like who are we reaching with this program? Is the diversity matching the diversity of our community or surrounding areas? Like, what does that look like? So they were kind of focused, I think, on what sounds like a middle ground between just what the city does and like who can kind of be in those spaces. So.
And the third one for me is like, my question is, what's not our role? I mean, we should be in the know if it's you're working through Prissy or Dale, just an update on how the progress is going on here. But if that first task that I got is 2025 is going to be focused on hiring a consultant, maybe we could be at least listening into the selection process and the timeline for all of that. That would be very helpful to us.
I think Andrea just mentioned that trying to get a little bit of board representation on that committee sounds like a possibility. And it sounds like something you all would be interested in.
Yeah.
So that would kind of be the first stop for involvement. And this is a question we can kind of revisit through the process, certainly. So
I don't know how to frame my question, so please help me. But I would like a component somewhere about external factors, risk factors, not really risk as the word, but, you know, as globally things are changing, or as things change within our country, policies may change, things may happen. So, and since our plan is long-term right now, I mean, at least for a year or two, we're still going to be working on it in phases. How is that scenario? Like, do we have a place we have sort of thought about it and put it in our plan? We can't control it,
right?
But do we have some consideration of that part into it? Does it make sense?
Are you kind of, let me know if I'm capturing this correctly. Are you kind of thinking about ability for staff and like ability for the plan to change based on external factors that are outside of city control?
Sort of, yeah. But I'm also leaning towards larger political, larger global changes that may not happen. And how, just a consideration of how that may impact everything going forward.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to consider a little bit more.
Yeah, it's too broad. It is too broad, I agree. But when we're thinking about something like this, I feel like we need to kind of somewhere think about anything that's, possible.
Okay, any other comments on either of these? Because I know we're basically out of time. So,
any questions for Andrea or Jillian? Follow-up questions? Okay, we want to thank you for your time this evening.
Yeah, thank all of you.
We look forward to staying connected.
Yeah, it sounds like I'll be touching base with you all through Dale, if not returning this fall. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jillian. Okay. Vice Chair?
Public comment discussion. Did we cover that already?
We have not. I am gonna give us a little bit of framing.
Yes.
So I feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record. I keep being like, as we discussed earlier in the year, we wanted to start making time in our agenda anytime we received public comment that was not on something on our agenda, having a little bit of time where we could discuss that public comment. Because as you know, and as Clerk Pieser has reinforced for us many times, the purpose of public comment during the meeting is not to engage with the commenter. And usually public comment is being made on something that's on your agenda. So you get to take that comment and then embed it into the conversation of the agenda item. During what I'm calling our summer break, the equity board was copied on 2 emails. I actually think you were the direct recipient of one of the emails, and there was a second email that the equity board was copied on. Everyone did a great job. No one responded, reply all to the email, and broke any of our public records. Open Public Meetings Act laws. Great job, equity board. But I did want to make a space for this group to discuss either of those public comment emails. I know in my email ahead of this meeting, I was going to invite Shay and Tony, who's not here tonight, because they both responded to me. And then Tony actually submitted a public comment himself to the city council after the first email that we were copied on earlier in the summer around the use of, or the framing of equity in the comprehensive plan update. And so he had a direct response. We talked about it. He then submitted a public comment both to our Planning and Policy Commission and then also to the City Council about that email. He's not here tonight, so I don't want to steal his thunder or take the words out of his mouth. But Shay is here, and so I do want to talk about the second email around the definitions of equity, and then I believe the email was specifically about equity as it's being used in the urban forest management plan, and the use of this tree equity index. And so Shay, I wanted to invite you to speak a little bit about your thoughts on that, since I know we communicated about that, and then invite anyone else to share thoughts on that particular email, and then we'll go back to the comprehensive plan public comment as is appropriate. So I don't know, Shay, I want to cede the floor to you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I admittedly wasn't prepared to speak tonight, but I definitely can comment a little bit, because I actually thought that the information about the trees was really important. However, I also thought there were some pieces that were missing when it came to how that comment was posed, because I think the writer may have needed a little more definition on what equity means for our city. And I was hoping that we could essentially explain how we look at it, even if we can't staple down a strong definition, because sometimes that can be the difference between saying, okay, we can, to ensure that we're not looking at equity in the wrong way.
Yep. Any other thoughts from the group?
I would like to know what you thought. Right, so I don't know what Tony thought, and I don't know what Shay thought, so it's like I'm kind of whirring around a conversation I don't know about.
I did also invite you, Kelly, to share what you thought. I mean, anyone can share what they thought.
No, but I mean, he wrote a letter.
Oh,
and Shay just said that Shay, you have points that you would have liked to have made. So I would like to hear them. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, and I don't have the email in front of me, so that's why I didn't want to go into too much detail. I was under the impression that we shared it amongst the board so that we could address it. Dale, do you know if that happened, or?
I'm realizing I don't think, Shay, I didn't forward your email.
Not hers, we saw Tony's.
But yes.
Okay. Let me back up a little bit, just so we're on the same page. So the comprehensive plan was sent out and it was reviewed and it was shared, and public comment was allowed. And there was a public comment that I hope everybody's aware of. Connie, remember? She's a repeat commenter on some of our strategy discussions. And Tony had some concerns about the verbiage. So to be specific and to thoughtfully respond to her, he was asked in a public way, not just within the authors or with the equity board, but to share broadly his thoughts were. And the venue by which he did that was through public comment. So as far as I know, what went after that is, yes, they absorbed what Tony recommended, but they're not changing any of the verbiage as it exists today. There's no changes made, which was the ask of Connie. So that's Tony's reply. Keep it as is. Thank you, Connie, for commenting, but we're going to keep the words as is.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and for me, it was more so just wanting to provide Connie with better definitions to help her understand what we envision and attempt to accomplish when people bring things to the board to review.
So did you do that?
I did not directly, but I think I did give Dale a few examples of what we strive to essentially convey to the community, in a sense that we don't look at equity as a monolith of things. It's a group of different things. As I mentioned before, there's dimensions that are related to equity, and a lot of those dimensions are not race-based. They are there are intersections that do occur that may happen with race relation, but not necessarily when the equity board looks at a particular thing. Similar to, kind of equity in billing of water when we went through that. It's not, that's definitely not a race thing. It's definitely a cognitive thing or something that was based in a different context. And it appeared to me that Connie might have needed some help understanding exactly where we tend to come from and what we expect to express when we address comments or any of the items that are brought to us in our meetings.
Yeah, so Shay provided that for me, and I used some of that to provide an explanation of that in this particular case, when thinking about using this tree equity tool, is using a certain number of characteristics or indicators to establish a score for a particular geographic area. So it is using racial demographics. It's also using heat index for an area to determine, is this an area where we need to think about planting more trees and thus increasing tree canopy, reducing, because it's hot there. And that, like, when you're thinking about equity in the realm of urban forest management, that there are going to be different things indicators that you're looking at than when you're thinking about purely maybe about health equity or about educational equity, that equity is contextual, I think was the point, Shay, that I think you were making in your email.
Yes.
And I think that was and this goes back to, the conversation we just had on how do we define and then talk about the dimensions of equity with the community, because I think the tension or the question that I read in the original email was seeming to search for a specific, this is what equity always means, and these are the 10 dimensions that or the character, not dimensions, these are the 10 indicators we always use to determine whether something is equitable or not. And that is not necessarily the way that we do that. And so I think that is, it's actually a good preview, I think, of a tension we might see come up over time in our community engagement, is this kind of maybe misunderstanding around equity is always going to mean this, and it's always going to be measured using these 10 things. It's like, actually, it's going to be different, and it's going to be contextualized.
So I'm so much more simple than this. Did we tell her what we're talking about?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And
yes, there's intersectionality that is inherently going to be there, but we are not defining equity with one term or one set standard. It's a myriad of standards, and obviously we all know it's evolving, and it's evolving very quickly. So we have to make the adjustments based on that, and not this monolithic thought that it's this and only this.
Yeah. So yes, there was a response
that said essentially not just that we're not doing it, but that explained
that in both cases. Whether that was received or not, it is unclear, but
I love that. I love how you phrased that. I just want to hear it.
Because I'm not exactly clear what's being said. I can track it, but I'm not sure that what's important to me about community engagement is that we get back and tell them the answer.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
That's what I was looking for.
A response happened to all.
We didn't just leave her hanging. She was.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm okay. I'm going to move us along if everybody's okay. Thank you, Shay. Dale, was that it for public comment? Were those the only two?
Those were the only two.
Okay. Other business items, two here. One, the Culture Fest table, which is scheduled for this Friday. What is that? 2 to 4 or 3 to what was the time?
Yeah,
6 to 8?
5:30 to 7:30. Okay, I can get there eventually. Our powers combined, 5:30 to 7:30.
Okay, can I just get, I think I volunteered to be there and I was gonna check in with Priti because she's not feeling well. Hopefully she does get better, but I think it was just the two of us so far.
And I'll be there.
Oh, you'll be there. Great. Was there anybody else who was interested?
I
in
was
stuff?
planning on being there with my work,
Right,
but
okay.
I am now floating, so I'm happy to sit with you as
Wonderful.
long as you need me to.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
I'll be there.
wonderful. Okay, really, it's just I just feel there's a great opportunity for people who want to know what we're doing. And I know we have a lot of questions for ourselves internally and to be able to answer all their questions, but it's just a way for maybe just handing the mic saying, what are you experiencing that you feel the equity board needs to be aware of? I'm looking forward to hearing that. I don't know what that is. They know that we exist. So if there's something that they're thinking in their heads that the equity board needs to know, I'd like to hear it. So.
And thank you to the planning committee. We have 3 big posters that I'm going to print out on Friday morning that will be ready and will be up. One is equity board. So explain it says Issaquah Equity Board explains your purpose as a board, has your names on them as current members, and also has some of the lists some of the items that you've influenced or moved forward for the city over the course of the last few years. One is a, per the planning committee's recommendation, is a visual and some words defining equity and equality. And also the third is this interactive board where people can answer the question of why equity is important to them. So we've got that. We also will have a little half sheet flyer for board recruitment. I think, as everyone knows, and as we will celebrate at the end of our meeting this evening, Christina is going to be stepping away from the board. And so we have an open position. And so we have a little flyer that'll be in both English and Spanish to hopefully recruit for an open position. So a full plate, or I guess a full table on Friday.
Do you have the date on the culture?
It is Friday, September
6th. This Friday.
This Friday, right out there on that beautiful lawn.
Weather looks great too. Okay. Thank you, Dale. Any questions regarding the table? Okay, last item on our list tonight was a closing thought, which was recommended by Priti, but I'm all for it. We want to make sure we acknowledge one of our board members who is leaving us, Christina. So you've been with us since the onset. We are grateful for your participation, and I want to start and want to welcome my equity board members here to chime in. For me, you are a lesson in equity. For me, is because we always have to pause and acknowledge not everybody in the room may be up to speed with you, Ray, on what you're talking about, or we check in on ourselves saying slow down because there's other people that are not understanding what you're trying to articulate. So I was very grateful to always have you in the room with us because it helped us to think twice about what we said, to be thoughtful about the other participants who were in the room. So that's number one for me. And number two was, I hate myself for not taking Spanish in high school. I took that dead language called Latin because my counselor told me, and that got me nowhere. I should have taken Spanish.
Duolingo now.
It's in Latin?
Duolingo.
No, Duolingo is an app for making up Spanish. So now is the time to do it.
So I welcome my fellow board members if you'd like to chime in and give thought and thanks to Christina.
And I'll reinforce what Ray said. I think, Christina, you've been a great addition. I think it's a great reminder that one of the reasons we're here is to ensure that different perspectives are being heard. And your perspective was so important. When you spoke, I hope everyone listened because it was a different perspective than what we're thinking. And it was a constant reminder that we need to make sure that different voices are coming to the table to be heard.
Christina, I felt like we had I
want to say something.
I had a special, I don't know.
I have a deeply, truly thank you for everyone. And And yeah, Ray, you are doing an excellent job. I am proud of you. And I wish to do more, but I think you are doing amazing. So I'm so happy for that. And Lorna, I think the most important is to listen, as I said before, is really listen the people what they need. Because for example, recently I discovered that some parents who are not in the in the basic needs, I mean they had money and they are Americans, I think. They are white. So they are creating groups and they are making activities in the schools. So they are enjoying different, I think. That way was a new world for me. And I am grateful because they opened the heart and the information to my ears. So that's why also I need to know more, and I'm really, really happy to discover different worlds. Every time that I am listening, I am enjoying a lot. And thank you for having me here. It was my pleasure. Maybe I didn't speak too much, but sometimes it is not because I am not understanding. Sometimes it's because I want to learn. And thank you. Thank you.
Kelly, I don't think you were done speaking.
Yeah, well, I just from day one, I had a connection to you. We couldn't communicate very well, but I think we really communicated through our heart, and that made me feel, like I had a partner here, and because it was new to me, and just and everything you said always made me think. So thank you so much. I enjoyed your company here quite a bit.
Yeah. Shay, did you get a chance to speak? Go ahead.
Yes, I had my hand up. I was waiting for everyone in the room though. So I want to say, Christina, watching you evolve in this board has been amazing. Like I saw you from being primarily Spanish speaking to not even really needing the interpreters anymore. On top of the fact that you also raised great points anytime you did comment. And it was just lovely seeing your kids in the frame. I really enjoy having you and getting your perspective. And sometimes I wish you would talk more, but on the same token, I do understand that you wanted to make sure you were aware and you were always thoughtful about what you said. And that is a really big deal, especially with a board like this. So I appreciate you so much, and I'm going to miss you.
Thank you. I will miss everyone. Maybe I didn't meet a lot, but I'm so happy that the city is changing, and yeah, we need to move. Otherwise, the energy is not flowing properly, and we need to feel like everyone is embraced and feeling supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Absolutely. Yes, thank you, Christina. Oh.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for that. Before we adjourn, one last update. The October 16th meeting is going to be a joint session with our Human Services Commission, and it's going to occur at the Senior Center. That's Wednesday, October 16th at 6 p.m. I think Dale sent out the hold on your calendar, so we look forward to that discussion. Just a reminder with everybody of the shared meeting at a different location.
And one final reminder, I think you all saw this in the email I sent out, but there is an optional special meeting on the 19th of this month to give feedback on the update to the strategic plan. We're hoping to have at least 2 equity board members there. It will not be a hybrid meeting. It will be all in person, which I know is limiting, but it was going to be impossible for me to manage a hybrid engagement, given that we'll have all of our boards and commissions in the room. It will be at the Pickering Barn, so a nice big space. And it'll be the sort of final engagement with the community before that update goes to the city council for consideration. So Priti was the chair of that task force, so there has been great, a great equity lens in the leadership of that task force, but I know she made a request that the equity board get an additional opportunity to weigh in on the update, and so that will be the opportunity for that. So the RSVP, the option to RSVP went out in the email that I sent ahead of this meeting. Head on in there if you're interested in being there, and you'll get materials for that if you are attending at the end of next week. So look forward to seeing any of you that can attend there for that.
Okay. With that, I don't see any questions, comments from anybody in the room. We're right at time, almost. Okay, I call our September Equity Board meeting to an end at 7:59 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent job, Ray.
Hey.